Greetings from the center of Canada and welcome to the Fringe Faithful Collective. My name is Mike Powell and this is article episode number 5, entitled The Recognition that Hybridity Rests at the Foundation of Who We Are, and that none of us as humans have an objective, non-syncretistic, or identical perspective on life and spiritual matters. In April 2017, as a counterpart to my last concept album, also known as Fringe Faithful, I wrote a song that was an attempt to demarcate or unveil my personal identity after a decade of faith disintegration and renovation. The track was called The Manticore, and one phrase that bookends the song is,
"We're all each other's Pharisee, we're all each other's Christ."
We're all each other's Pharisee, we're all each other's Christ. One main theme of the track is hybridity, which is closely related to the idea of outlying, liminal, or marginal spaces. To say the same thing differently, if one is neither this nor that, or alternatively both and, this causes problems for categorization, whereby the category-less are relegated to and often dismissed as some kind of subgrouping, in other words, below or inferior to the norm or conventionally sanctioned, accepted, or endorsed. Granted, most of us are understandably uneasy with uncertainty. Dichotomous thinking is appealing to us because if everything about what we know was either or, how we approached our existence would be alluringly straightforward. But if a person has been breathing long enough to know they're self-conscious, they realize that life is anything but unambiguous. What's more, to use an analogy, as much as people might want to see themselves as a single malt whiskey, everyone is incontrovertibly blended. As much as Christians and assorted religious folk across generations have taken it upon themselves to draw lines in the sand, separating in and out, and to build towering walls atop arguably arbitrary divisions, erroneously assuming they have a flawless understanding of what's real or true, no two people among us have believed the exact same thing about every single important or trivial matter. There is no one who has a completely objective or untainted perspective. We're all profoundly hybrid beings. And though we routinely gravitate towards certain cultural and spiritual associations that correspond best with who we see ourselves to be, the reality is that who we are is significantly more haphazard and amalgamated than we'd like to believe. Take, for instance, the now notorious Jewish sect who are known as Pharisees. According to the gospel accounts, these people were Christ's main opponents. There were a few notable exceptions, though, like Nicodemus, Paul, and Jesus himself. Among the various groups, in other words, the Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Zealots, Jesus would likely have been classed as a Pharisee, which is probably why he got into so much trouble with them, because he didn't fit into their mold or expectations, not to mention that he is shown to have frequently challenged their interpretation and application of the law. In other words, although we frequently view Christ and the Pharisees as being diametrically opposed because our minds prefer clear-cut us versus them distinctions, perhaps the circumstances were and are considerably more multifaceted. In fact, while Christians in every age, across the vast spectrum of traditions, have all claimed Jesus for themselves and assume they're on the right side while others are not, what if it's not as simple as that? After all, considering the thousands of church denominations that exist, the millions of congregations, and everyone who has ever considered themselves to be a Christian, both living and dead, how could anyone or any group be so naive or self-righteous as to say that they have a pure, unmixed, or non-fragmentary understanding of God or faith? What's lamentable and surprising is how common such a naivety and self-righteousness pervades the Christian landscape. Yet if ever one were asked a question like, are we products of nature or nurture, those same people would be quick to accept that it's not either or. We are who we are because of both biology and environmental factors. In view of this, it's beneficial to be aware that our identities, theologies, and spiritual lives are significantly varied, non-uniform, and as unique as an individual's own DNA, personality, interests, experiences, choices, etc. No two Christians are exactly the same. We're all hybrids of both the revolutionary and traditional, progressive and fundamentalist, sane and irrational, believing and skeptic, good and evil, Christ and Pharisee. And by Pharisee here, I mean in the worst sense of the term, in other words, legalistic, judgmental, hypocritical, etc. So as we relate to and interact with one another, it's important to keep at the forefront of our minds that we could be wrong, even if we're convinced or persuaded otherwise. Sometimes we rightly embody love and godliness, while other occasions we're thoroughly indifferent and hateful. The challenge is to see our attitude, words, and behavior towards those who we might consider to be least as directly related to and reflecting our treatment of God, as aptly portrayed by Jesus in the parable of the sheep and the goats. Correspondingly, there's also something to be said of Christ's words that whoever is not against us is for us, and other passages like in Ephesians where it speaks of Jesus dismantling and deconstructing the dividing wall of hostility between people. It's in this way that we're all each other's Pharisee and all each other's Christ, as per the Manticore. There will always be a stigma associated with being other. However, if we're willing to consider and admit that we are all genuinely other, we'd be in a much better position to catalyze peace, justice, and compassion. Peace and love, sisters and brothers.